How's it going, everybody? RazingHel here, and today I'm going to be talking a bit about a mod called Starving Floor for Don't Starve Together. So this is a mod that, according to the description, puts a strong emphasis on teamwork and communication with fast-paced, class-based gameplay. So let's break it down a bit and talk about what that means. I have a little bit of experience now with this mod. I played it with a team of up to 6 players a couple of nights. So I would say cumulatively I have probably about 3 hours of experience total with the mod at this point, and I thought I would talk a little bit about what I thought of it, as well as show you some of the gameplay that is relevant to the key points that I'm going to be discussing here. And the reason that I decided to set aside a separate episode for this mod in particular is because it is fairly entailed. This is a mod, as you might have inferred from the title of it. It is based around the concept of the game Killing Floor, in which you as a bunch of players are in an arena of sorts, an area, an arena, whatever you want to call it, and wave after wave of enemies spawns in, and you have to team together with the other players who are in that same area and kill them all. Then when one wave ends, you'll have accrued a certain amount of resources. Usually it's money. In Killing Floor, it's also experience, and you'll be able to purchase upgrades and whatnot, and additional weapons and stuff at a shop. And that's what Starving Floor here tries. That's the experience that Starving Floor tries to emulate. And it does a pretty decent job of it up until, I would say, wave 10 or so. So I'm going to sort of start at the beginning of it. It reminds me a little bit of the Forge event for Don't Starve Together, but it is much more based in the mechanics that Don't Starve Together as a game itself employs, right? There are no real special abilities that weapons have or anything like that, which actually, come to think of it, is a bit of a downside to it, but we'll come to that later. So that's how I got into it. I played it on a couple of other Discord friends' servers, so I didn't get an opportunity to play it by myself on my locally hosted server, and that could be a bit of a problem because latency is an important factor, and I generally have a higher latency connection, which made it a little bit more difficult to play a very combat-focused mod like this, because I wasn't able to kite very effectively when I have like 150 to 200 ping. But in spite of that, I still managed to have a good time, which I guess is quite telling. So that is the history behind how I came to play it. Played it for a couple of nights, and then after that I think everyone pretty much had their fill of it. So it's a mod that's pretty good, pretty compelling, but at the same time it is short-lived. It's not something that I would see myself playing for over a week in any circumstance. When it comes to the actual gameplay itself, what you are generally going to experience is a game in which, after you get an entire team together, you'd probably want more than just a couple of players, because the game has classes in it, and these classes give your players different perks when you choose that class. So on the actual description, the workshop page for the game itself, it lists the classes, and I'm just going to mention a couple of the ones that we found useful. For one thing, the Heavy. Playing Wolfgang as the Heavy class, of course, makes perfect sense. And then there was the Builder, and in my opinion, the Builder is kind of really overpowered because they automatically spawn in with 2 Houndius Shootius turrets, and they can place them right away. And when you compare it to the perks of a lot of the other classes here, I think the Builder class by far, maybe the Heavy might be a second close contender, and that's only if you're playing Wolfgang. But by and large, the Builder class is really the powerful class. It's the heavyweight in terms of this class-based gameplay here, and it made me a little bit disappointed that so many of the other classes were largely ineffective. A couple of the other ones, I'm just going to give you an example here. So there was a Farmer class. The problem is that in between rounds, your characters automatically regenerate their stats, so there isn't a whole lot of impetus on, as a group, growing anything to give the players additional hunger or additional sanity or heal them because of their health. There's not a whole lot of utility for such a class, and these other alternative classes have really significant shortcomings in the department of combat. And as a mod that focuses primarily on combat, it's going to be really ineffective to play as one of these other classes. Another class is the Cook. Like, they start with some interesting stuff like a Hambat, which is most certainly useful for a team, from a team aspect, but their other perks are just so mediocre that, you know, the players as a team just don't need to ever make use of them, aside from something like a Hambat. So it was interesting. A little bit disappointing, like I said, in terms of the classes, because we pretty much universally all defaulted to either Heavy heavy or the builder. And in part, that is kind of the fault of the game because it doesn't have the same sort of dynamic combat that really allows you to experiment with different things. Like there is a trapper class, but the thing is when you have like a wall of enemies coming at you, putting down a few extra tooth traps is going to be pretty insignificant in the grand scheme of things. Tooth traps don't do that much damage against wave after wave after wave of enemy, and there really aren't that many other enemies in the game, or there aren't any other traps in the game that are really effective, at least that were given to the trapper as a class. Because when you take a look at what the trapper sort of boasts, tooth trap blueprint, a tooth trap blueprint, enough resources. Granted, resources for these classes do spawn. So if you are playing a class that starts out with like ×3 grass, I'm not exactly sure what the timer is on for this, but if you use that 3 grass in your inventory, it will regularly respawn. So it's like it's a recurring resource drop of sorts right into your inventory. So the classes matter a little bit like that, and to mix it up a bit, I suppose, there might be space for one additional class outside of heavies and builders, but like as a team, we got the furthest using mostly builders and a couple of heavies. So that covers the classes, which is like one of the most significant aspects of this mod. Another aspect to it, of course, is going to be the enemy waves. And how do the enemy waves work? Well, you're locked in this arena as a team. It's by the florid postern, and enemies start spawning up from the ground, and you really don't get to prevent them from spawning. There's really nothing you can do to destroy the enemy spawners, and the terrain can come in to play a little bit. Since the maps, as far as I'm aware, are randomly generated, the terrain can have a bit of a determining effect on whether or not enemies are going to spawn in certain locations. But the problem that I see here is that, it starts out fairly easy, right? You got spiders as enemies, maybe some spider warriors, and then it steps it up a little bit, and you'll come up with things like the clockwork chess pieces, for example, which of course have ranged attacks and are a little bit more challenging to actually kite. But my major problem with this here is that the Don't Starve engine really just isn't built for a variety of combat styles. So at the end of the day, pretty much everybody defaults to either running away or tanking. If you have a bunch of heavies, they are all in marble suits and whatnot, you can just gang up like 6 heavies in one spot. They can all gang up and just beat the hell out of the incoming mobs. It's been quite effective at, playing as Wolfgang, all heavy, got marble suits, some ham bats. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty fun. The other option seems to be to run away, and to make this work, what seemed to work the best was to have a lot of builders with a lot of Houndius Judiuses, and then you would engage those enemies on very particular terms, right? While the Houndius Judius was helping to pick away and distract the other enemies to keep them off of you. There really isn't a lot of option. You don't have the ability to kite very effectively because you're constantly being swarmed. To make kiting work, you kind of have to be able to get away from one enemy, but the problem is when you have a wall of enemies, you have 5 enemies coming at you, it's very difficult to pull it off. And what I found to be most effective, like I said, was either the entire team gangs up on them, right? You're matching the forces there, 5 enemies against 5 players. It's fairly even, kind of tanky, but it's even, or just running over to the Houndius Judiuses that the builders had placed. Another problem with the waves, and this is ultimately what killed our runs, is that up until a certain point you have fairly easy to kill mobs, but they continue to increase in difficulty. Chess piece mobs are obviously or clockwork chess piece mobs, the harder ones to kill, the bishops, the knights. I don't think there were ever any rooks in the ones we spawned, but what absolutely doomed our runs here were the rock lobsters. For some reason, the developer of this mod, I think his name is Mouse something, let me check here. His name is just Mouse. Yeah, so for some reason, this modder decided to include these rock lobsters, and I think it was a mistake because they really drag the momentum of the game down, right? Up until this point, everything was really fast-paced and fun, but the minute the rock lobsters end up in it, you can't really use Houndius Judius against them because the rock lobsters are almost perpetually in their defensive state, which is a real problem because they take significantly less damage when in that state, so it's very difficult to kill them. And if you don't use the Houndius Judius, that means everybody kind of has to go as a warrior class, and then you have to break up into like teams of 2 and sort of engage those rock lobsters one-on-one, or like 2 players versus 1 rock lobster. The problem is more rock lobsters continue to spawn while you are doing this, and you have to stand around and wait for the rock lobster to come out of its protective state. So as a mod that really encourages this fast-paced combat and stuff, the rock lobsters absolutely dragged the entire progression of the round to a standstill. It felt like no progress was being made. There were people who were continuing to lose health. We weren't able to get to the next wave, etc., etc. And really the only class that was viable in a situation such as that was the tanky class. I forget the name of it. It's the tanky class with it's called the heavy. The heavy was really the only viable class there because it has the ability, the inventory continually spawns food, Froggo Brunwiches, which means that as Wolfgang you can maintain your mighty state, which is pretty important. So yeah, up until that round, you know, it was viable to use the Houndius, but at that point, once you start getting the rock lobsters, really the only viable way to counter them, I think, was going to be with the heavies. And we just never got through it. We did spawn in some stuff and whatnot to make it easier to see if we could get through that wave. And okay, if that's just the one hang-up wave, but then the next wave was going to include rock lobsters as well. And we ultimately, as a team, decided that it just was not very fun with the rock lobsters, and we were ultimately going to die a slow and boring death due to them. So that is the main problem that I see with how the waves were set up. By and large, they're as good as can be expected given the limitations of the combat system and Don't Starve. Like I said, you kind of default to either running away or face tanking kind of as a group. But yeah, it was an interesting implementation to see, you know, what could be done with the engine. But at the end of the day, that was where we always got hung up, was on those rock lobsters. And I think it's more than just not having the right strategy. It's the fact that, you know, by default, the rock lobsters just slow everything down. They have you standing around waiting for them to come out of their protected state. And the fact that they will continue to spawn even after you kill, like if there was a finite number of them that would spawn for that round, I think it would be tolerable, but they continue to spawn and it just seems to be a losing battle. You cannot kill enough of them given their mandatory time delay that they enforce on the time between when you can attack them and when you can't, because they're hiding. And that was annoying. Moving on from classes, though, let's talk a little bit about crafting. Like I said before, the crafting in this game can be done. A lot of players have resources in their inventory based on their class that continue to respawn, but by and large, there is not a whole lot you can craft outside of the shop, right? The shop appears at the end of every round. It opens up, you can buy things with the money that you've earned from killing enemies and from your team killing enemies, and there are just a few things you can buy there that can set you for the rest of the game, like a hambat. It's an infinite weapon. There's really no reason to have somebody in the camp crafting additional weapons, and a lot of the weapons that are available for Don't Starve outside of the really basic stuff or the hambat are just not practical to craft without having like a huge build up to it, right? You're not going to be crafting dark swords in this mod because somebody has to go and farm nightmare fuel and you already have enough monsters running around as it is. It's just impractical. So something needed to be done with the weapons or whatnot. I'm not sure. By default, Don't Starve Together does not have the variety in terms of like low end gear items that you could craft, and there was nothing in this mod that made it where you could reasonably craft higher tier stuff. So I kind of cover that. The fighting, I guess the last thing to talk about is the shop. Like I said before, this is a randomized thing that appears at the end of every round. You can go ahead and use the money that you've earned during that round to buy various items and whatnot to like either heal the team, weapons, armor, just very general type of stuff like that. And of course the hambat's the best because it has infinite durability, and by the time it rots or whatnot, you can just go ahead and buy another one. The one limitation here is that since the shop is randomized, it's not guaranteed what you'll get. So sometimes you might go through several rounds before a hambat shows up, which it can really throw a spanner in the works, as they say. But those are my thoughts, and that was some gameplay on the Starving Floor mod for Don't Starve Together. Granted, this mod is fairly old at this point. It was originally released on July 3rd of 2015 by Mouse and hasn't been updated since November of that same year. There has been talk from other modders. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't looked into it all, but there might be a better version of this mod that improves on some of the aspects that I saw that really weren't working here, some of the mechanics, but I haven't tried that one out yet, and I might do more research into that to see if we can find a better version of the Starving Floor. But I most certainly found it a compelling concept, and I enjoyed my 3 or so hours that I spent playing it with, like I said, from anywhere from 3 to 6 people, I would say. And those are the general sizes of the teams that we had. And it's not something I would recommend playing without friends by any means. More people that you have on, the better. And if you can communicate with them in voice chat, I would say that's probably the best. Because when you're fighting, you don't have a lot of time to be typing in the text chat. So this is one of those mods, unlike normal Don't Starve Together, it's probably really important that you actually are communicating as a team on voice chat. So just something to keep in mind there. Thank you very much for watching as always, and I hope to see you next time.